A question to begin tonight's conversation. Several folks may be joining us today. They might not be super regular voters. They're trying to become regular voters. And we might even have someone here today who's trying to identify, what their voting plan and strategy ought to be. So what made you decide to become a regular voter? Does anyone want to take a stab at the first question?
I'll learn how to unmute first before I start talking. So I'll take a stab at it. Growing up in my home, I don't recall many discussions around the dinner table about politics. In fact, I think most of my neighbors were more concerned with bills and putting food on the table. And so I don't think that they connected politics with their immediate needs. So for me, my environment growing up, voting was very much distant, something that I didn't engage in, and I'm not sure my parents engaged in until I got to college. So for me, my environment did a 180 because I went to a school that had a history of student activism, from the free speech movement to a campaign to divest from apartheid South Africa. So I jumped right in and started to organize and really understood and learned my voice and how significant it was. So for me, college really opened my eyes to being engaged civically.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think I saw a lot of eyes light up because a lot of us became super engaged and involved, or at least interested at the college level. Does anyone else have an answer or just a thought they'd like to add to that part of the conversation? What made you decide to become a regular voter?
So this is Rima again, and I think my experience was a little bit different than Jillian's. I remember being a child in the car driving with my dad to a variety of different lessons, and him just reiterating to me time and time again, as an American, this is your duty, this is your obligation to vote, this is your obligation to be involved. I am the child of immigrants, and he always instilled in us and my brother and sister and myself that voting is your duty. It is something that you have to do, and there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I remember very well wishing that NPR was not a radio station that my dad liked, because he would always listen to it, and listening to some of that commentary through the presidential cycles and how it's really changed over the years. I remember, driving to horseback lessons, hearing about Sly Fox, Bill Clinton, and how our news has changed over the years and how we've become more and more divisive from my point of view.
Thank you for sharing that. I'll take one more person if you have something to share.
Oh. Go ahead, Nicole.
We'll go Danielle first, then we'll go to Nicole.
Oh, okay. I was going to share, Adrianne, that I think as many of our stories are probably all individual in and of themselves. I actually grew up in a suburb of Cleveland, Ohio. So as a child, I remember the national news talking about the county I lived in, Cuyahoga County, as one to watch on election night. So at a very early age, I felt and saw that my vote mattered. The pundits said so on the national news, and I was fortunate to have parents who demonstrated it in the way that they took their civic responsibility seriously, pulling out pages of the Cleveland Plain Dealer and sharing them with each other so that they could show up on election day informed, but still being part of a small enough community that I knew the people who were running for local elections, school board, mayor, their kids went to my school. So I was really fortunate early on to see how my voice mattered in shaping both local elections and national elections. And I feel really fortunate for having had that experience.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. We're going to really have some conversation tonight around engagement also. So hopefully you'll have the opportunity to lend a little bit more to that discussion. Nicole, you wanted to share something?
Well, I was just going to say, part of being a regular voter is to see the people around you voting on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I grew up with was a very active community. I mean, I grew up in Iowa, so, I know everybody's familiar with it being the first state, in presidential elections and caucuses, but the people around our family voted. Our family was dedicated to voting. So my mother took us with her to vote. my school was a polling location. So we knew that when we were going to school, we had to avoid the polling lines. It was very much a part of our regular schedule. It is what we saw, it's what we did, and our school made it a point to give us voter registration packets when we got to that age. So voting was never an option. It was just something that we took for granted that this is your job.
Mhm.
So kind of a mix of everybody else's experiences, but it was what we did, and we knew that that was what we had to do.
Awesome. And thanks for sharing that. And it's something that kind of shapes who we are and where we're going. And so, you know, a good, perfect follow-up to that, and perhaps Representative Shackleford, you can kind of lead us off here. Who's voting and who's not voting? You know, what are the demographics that we have participating currently?
So I grabbed some demographics before I came on for the Kaiser family, and for Indiana, we are at about 63% people are registered, for Black people that are registered to vote. That is about the average for the whole state, and for whites, it's about 67%. But of those that's actually voting, out of that voter eligibility population, for Blacks, it's about 47%, and then the whole state is 49%. So when you look at it, whether it's going to be men, women, by race, I know they're saying some of the people that are not voting is our young people, our millennials and below, and also the different races as far as Blacks and Latinos and Asians also. So I would say we have to let them know how valued their vote is, how powerful their vote is. I think sometimes with young people and even in the African American community, they feel that their vote doesn't matter. They feel that it doesn't count. But we are seeing higher voter turnout since 2014. So it's been increasing every election. And I think as we start talking about those issues that really affect people, that people care about, that'll bring them out more to the polls and want to vote. I can see our voter turnout being significant this November, as we've been seeing the protests in the street. People are demanding action. They have lists of demands. And I think they're finally starting to see that connection, that if I have these demands, if this is what is important to me, I want to make sure that I see these people in the office that's going to guarantee that those demands are met.
Thank you. So along that same question, it's really, really important for us to gauge those numbers that were just dropped there. I'm going to throw slightly a bogey onto that question. Do we think that there's some importance to people being able to see people who look like them on the ballot?
So I actually wanted to hop on and talk about that. I was looking up some numbers specifically with the 2012 race, and the U.S. The Census Bureau decided, or had numbers out there that noted that people that lived above or below or at the poverty level, less than half of people living at that level voted. Whereas people who had an income of over 75,000, well, their numbers were about north of 77%. And so, you know, that made me, I mean, that actually echoed kind of what I saw growing up in Compton, California. And I think that what some of those people saw were a lack of diversity. So they didn't see people who look like them, that they thought, okay, this person can help me solve my problems because they understand where I'm coming from, or I even have a chance myself to go and talk to this person and share my concerns. I think that there's a number of issues, and I know you're going to dive into this about gerrymandering districts, but I think the lack of diversity plays a part in who gets out there and vote. Anyone agree with that or disagree?
I definitely agree with that. And I also think I had this moment back in 2018 when I was out canvassing, and we were just talking about issues, and I was just talking to them about the issues that we were advocating for. And they said, "You're not from this neighborhood." And I told them, "Yes, you're right. I am not from this neighborhood." And they said, "Yeah, that's what happens. People just come out when it's time for the elections and never bother coming back." But what I wanted to share is that as important and crucial as voting is, and to, you know, again, quote my father, it is our duty, but it's also our duty to remember that our civic duties go beyond November, and our engagement goes beyond November. Our wanting people to be there and be at the table when decisions are made that affect them go beyond November. And I think that's so important as we're advocating for voting. It's important not just to take someone's vote for granted, but to continue to engage them along the process, because their issues matter, their life matters, their voice matters, and it's so important to continue to engage in the long run and not just to come out in a very disingenuous way, between October and November or ahead of the primaries, because people will catch you on that one and they will let you know when you're in the wrong, and rightly so.
On that same note, I mentioned we'd probably spend a little bit of time on engagement. So Indiana tends to continue to rank at the bottom of voter engagement and turnout. So how much of that long game, specifically by organizations like Women for Change, nonpartisan organizations and organizations that are just there to engage voters around issues and ways that they can advocate for themselves or use their voice, how much do you think that those two could tie hand in hand with one another? Do we think that the long game could change the road for our voting?
Danielle, I saw that you had unmuted yourself, so I'm going to let you take the floor. I don't want to take up all the space. I have a tendency to do that.
No, go ahead, Rima. Where the question went, I think you have something that's on the tip of your tongue, and I'll add to it.
Well, I think here in Indiana, the Brennan Center for Justice and Law, they have identified Indiana as one of the most heavily partisan gerrymandered states in the nation. And I think people are aware of that fact, people know that fact, and they kind of think twice, does my vote actually count when you have packed and cracked these districts, to serve you? And I think that that's important as we advocate for different pieces of legislation. I think at the top of our mind should be fair voting, putting that back into the hands of the citizens. I also think that it is not by coincidence that our most diverse county, Marion County, prior to 2018, we only had one early voting site. Voter suppression is real. It's alive and it's thriving. And I think that we need to all start taking notice of that. And this also plays back into that. If I know that all the surrounding counties around me have multiple voting sites and we only have one, well, is it worth it? Are you really making it possible for me? I've often said that voting in Indiana is not for working people. We have some of the stringent hours, 6 to 6. I mean, sometimes, especially for women, we have to decide, are we going to pick up our kids from daycare, grab a meal, or vote? And we shouldn't really have to do that, especially with the economic stability that we're trying to advocate for at Women for Change. When daycare prices are so high, you're going to get charged for voting. That's tough.
Yeah, and it's not just whether you get charged for voting, it's whether you can even get that time off from work if you're a working parent or a single parent who may be working 1 or 2 or more jobs and you can't get that time off. And I think part of the engagement, there are organizations like Women for Change and other organizations that are working to get more people involved in the voting process, but we have to attack it from so many fronts that sometimes it can be exhausting, because we're talking about gerrymandering and voter access and whether you do mail-in voting and everything else. So it starts piling up, and I think a lot of people look at it and just go, oh, I don't know where to start. So it's difficult.
Adrianne, I look at the world as a marketer in every sense of the word. And so as a marketer, as a brand strategist, I'm obsessed with removing friction that's inside of the buying experience. So friction can be anything that impedes a consumer from completing the whole journey. In a purchase decision, it can be small roadblocks such as a bad online experience or long wait times, or it can be major problems like the product isn't available or my order was botched. In the same way that we think about customer experience and selling a product, the voter's experience also does not always feel incredibly seamless for some of the reasons that have been mentioned. One More Voice, which is the nonpartisan initiative I'm representing tonight, is working to knock down as many of those hurdles as possible, starting with quick and easy voter registration online at onemorevoice.com, simply by just having your driver's license available. Some people, young people, don't even know that it takes 2 or 3 minutes only. We tested it and actually had some young people try it too, and they demonstrated back to us, this is not that hard. So knocking down hurdles like making it easy to register and putting it in an online space for them, giving unbiased information about what's on your ballot, so you know when you show up, you can feel confident that you're informed, at least about the people or the issues that are local to your area. And then finally, pulling them through the whole journey by allowing them to sign up for things that speak their love language, which is give me text reminders or email reminders if that's the preference, but to bring them along on the journey, and not just simply, as you know, Nicole and Rima were saying, having these mile markers. We have to bring them along, create an experience, create habits that allow them to stay engaged throughout the whole process, not just the week of election day.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, if I could just follow up on a connection with the advocacy piece. We need everyone to stay engaged until January. We are not in session until January. There are laws that need to be made at the state level. We had some made at the local level with the Election Commission due to COVID, but we need everyone to be down at the State House saying we need more vote centers. They need to be statewide. We need more early voting centers across the state. We need an independent committee looking at how these districts are going to be drawn that has civilians on it. So there are numerous things that we can make at the state level, and we need everyone to be at that State House come January advocating for these kind of things. I think the advocacy piece, the voter mobilization and turnout go hand in hand.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And so what I'm hearing is it's a long game. It's an extremely long game, and we've got to have longer attention spans as voters, but also as regular voters that can engage other people in the process. We've got to be willing to play that long game for higher engagement. So I'm going to bounce back to Representative Shackleford, and then I'm going to come to Nicole. And I have this question. So how do voters get their voices to make a difference? How do they use their vote and their voice to make a difference?
So one way you can do it is actually vote, and vote in every election, vote in the primary and the general. I think people need to understand and be educated on who are they actually voting for, the candidates platform, who represent them. So if you're voting in every election, your data is collected, and usually we're collecting data at the primary. We're going to send you out more information. You get in a lot of those databases. So your voice starts to be heard, because now you're being targeted as one of those people that are engaged and one of those people that may be more vocal. Then the advocacy piece, once you start voting, then start advocating, start emailing your legislators, start coming to visit them, invite them out, talk to them. Legislators listen to their constituents, and they know who vote and who don't vote. And when they know that you vote and they see your address and you're a constituent, you're going to be the first one to get a meeting on their books. So if you want to make sure that your vote count, make sure you continue to do it, and then stay engaged with your elected officials, because that will put you at that forefront, that first step in making sure your voice is heard.
Thank you. I'll go Nicole, and then I think Jillian might have something that she wants to chime in here as well.
I think the easiest thing to do, and I saw a friend who said something about this recently, which is show up. I mean, that's the first part of it. You just have to show up. You have to vote. You have to show up to the meetings. You have to actually be informed. And I know it's hard because there's so much information, but you have to show up from the beginning and don't show up at the end. So one of the things that we've seen here in our community in Bloomington is where there may be a piece of legislation or something coming through the city council that people don't like, but they don't come until the very last minute. Whereas if they're actually paying attention to the meetings, there's nothing that comes, out of a void. So there are committee meetings and there are public hearings. Part of being an active and engaged voter is actually paying attention to what's going on into your community. And if you can't do it yourself, hopefully there are organizations and groups that actually pay attention to it for you that you can join, and they'll send you a digest on the issues that you're interested in, and you can pay attention through that way. But the thing is, you have to show up, because when you do, your elected officials pay attention. And I've seen things turn around completely just because of the people who showed up in the room and spoke against it or for it. And it can happen, but you have to be there. So it's sometimes not enough just to call and say, I don't like this. You have to call, you have to write, and you have to show up, because it makes a difference. So that's what I would suggest for people.
Thank you. Jillian.
Well, pre-COVID, many of us probably had Oscar parties and Super Bowl parties. And I think would be beneficial is doing a Zoom voting party. Like, get people in the room and start talking about these issues. In this climate, I can tell you, I have had so many courageous and uncomfortable conversations with my neighbors, with my friends, with my colleagues. And it really was just about talking about issues and seeing it from different people's perspectives and being open-minded. And it was so eye-opening and educational for me, talking to my neighbor and getting his thoughts on a particular issue. And right now, everyone's talking about criminal justice reform in my neighborhood. So I really think it's going out there and just having those conversations, meeting people for coffee, talking to people in your book club about these issues, talking about some of the candidates. And maybe it's a fun way to do it too. You know, get a little wine while you drink and talk about an issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's got a lot to do with it. So, you know, I think that that leads us directly into another place, because a lot of times people just say vote, like that's your first line of action. But why is it critical, specifically since we're having conversation on this platform, why is it critical for women to be informed voters?
Adrianne, if there are 1.7 million eligible Hoosiers who are not registered to vote, and we know the census shows that there are about 51% women in the state, that means that there are easily close to 867,000 Hoosier women who are unregistered today. When you think about the impact that women have as in the buying decision and the influencing decision of products they bring into their homes or healthcare choices they make for their family, women drive 70 to 80% of all consumer purchasing, so through their buying power and influence. So it seems only natural that those behaviors would translate over to voting as well. Women have this multiplier effect, caring for children, caring for older generations, the perspective they have on the world, and then the way that they make decisions for the people in their homes and in their communities have an immeasurable impact on the way that women show up in the world. It's just, I don't know that we could put a number on it, but we know that there are many women today whose voices aren't being heard and captured.
So let's add on to that then, right? So if we know that it's important, but what does it really even mean to be an informed voter? What does an informed voter look like?
I think that an informed voter is a voter that understands the policies and how those policies not only affect them and their families, but their entire community. And then they understand the candidates and where they fall on these issues. I know that time and time again, Women for Change, we advocate for different pieces of policy in the Indiana State House. And when I share some stats or some numbers with folks in my family, to be honest, they're like, oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that Indiana ranked 7th highest in the nation as far as sexual assault among high school girls. I didn't know that. Why don't we have consent legislation? I didn't know that there's not a pink tax, that we have a pink tax in Indiana, but there's no tax on Viagra. I didn't know that. And I think that's really important. These are the things that we have to know, because to Danielle's point, we're the ones that are purchasing, we're the ones that are driving, yet these pieces of legislation don't actually support us. I think that it's, you know, when I go out and talk to folks and tell them, did you know that it will be 2088 before a white cisgender woman makes the same as a white cisgender man. And if you go down to Black women and Latinx women and women like myself that people don't know where we're from, to be honest, it just gets worse and worse, right? And I think that's really important. Understand those policies, understand where your candidate falls on them, and then make sure that you're following up with them and asking them where they stand on that, because that not only affects you and your family, it affects your community, and it affects the state as far as our economy is concerned.
So what I'm hearing, and if there's others that want to chime in this space, what I'm hearing is informed voters can make greater decisions on behalf of themselves, the rest of their peers, contemporaries, and others that are like them. But it's really important that women not only vote, as we know the first step is, but fully get involved in the process and that long game of engagement and advocacy, as we were talking before. Did anyone else want to chime in that space?
And I just wanted to add, I would be remiss to say that, you know, as I went through those stats on the gender wage gap for LGBTQ women, for trans women, especially trans women of color, those numbers are far more staggering. And I think that that's something that's very important that we need to point out and talk about, because we need to lift those voices up and make sure that we include them in the conversation.
Awesome.
And I just wanted to add quickly, the makeup of the General Assembly, we already know is majority men. They need to be educated by females, by what are those issues that affect women. When you look at our committee structure, most of the committees that affect women, when you're talking about health, family and children, education, we have the majority of males on there. It's hard for a female to even get on those committees and actually stay on those committees because they're big committees, but they're the ones that affect women the most. So we have to make sure that women are gauged, that they are informing these elected officials what their needs are, what their wants are, and making them be accountable.
Thank you so much for that. I think that adds so much richness to the conversation about why women need to be informed, but what it actually means to be an informed voter. Jill?
I'd like to add to the informed piece, to make sure your information is very diverse. Like, put yourself in a room with people with diverse perspectives. I know I tend to hang out with a certain amount of, certain people, and they're kind of feeding themselves the same thing I feed myself. And I oftentimes have to step out and grab information to have a broader perspective. Now, where I land on it is my decision, but kind of getting information from different sources, I feel more informed because I've went out and searched and gotten more information. So I tend to think about just kind of educating myself with a broader range of people with diverse perspectives.
Thank you so much for adding to that. And so, I mean, here's a question that we need to toss on here. I'm kind of saving a couple of questions that I know we're going to spend a lot of time on till a little bit later, but does it mean something different to be informed in 2020 than it did in 2016? Does it take any more work, or is it the same?
Yeah, Adrianne, the way that we consume information is different. It's changing every single day. When you look at news consumption habits, for example, between non-voters and voters, non-voters follow news closely about 25%, compared to 40% of voters who say they watch the news closely. And to complicate things even further, how we get news is vastly different across generations. So again, going back to thinking through it through a marketer's lens, there are very few products that every single generation is interested in. Maybe toilet paper. Toilet paper might be a good example, that we all buy toilet paper. Same for voting, but that complicates things. So the way that boomers get their information today, majority is from television news. If you ask millennials or Gen Zers, do they even have television or subscribe to cable? Most of them do not. They don't pay their cable bill. They're getting their news online, including through social media. So what's challenging younger generations is having to go, and I have 2 teenage girls, and we have this conversation in our home all the time. My 15-year-old is an advocate for many things, from the environment to racial justice to everything you can imagine a young person is interested in. She'll bring me information, and I will say to her, Well, did you fact check that? Did you double check it on a reputable news source? Go check and see if you can find it in a couple other places. And that is a new habit for younger generations that I'm a Gen Xer, and boomers and others who came before me were able to trust the news media and journalistic integrity at face value. That doesn't necessarily exist everywhere today. And not to keep tying it back to One More Voice, but one of the elements of One More Voice that is particularly unique, we share the space of encouraging people to vote. That's not unique, but what's unique about One More Voice is centralizing resources online, unbiased, assembled by professional writers with journalistic integrity who are stripping out the bias of the information and putting it at your fingertips in one place, so that you can double check and confirm sources, information. And that's really powerful when you're uncertain about what to trust.
Thank you so much for that. Now, Rima, I would love for you to chime in here, because Women for Change was founded and birthed in our last major presidential election cycle. And so I really want to hear your opinion on that exact same question. Does it mean something different to be informed in 2020 versus 2016? And does it take more work?
Well, I think that something that I really wanted to share is that we should all be very upset about the fact that the United States is now in the top 5 most dangerous places for a journalist. It's in the top 5 most dangerous place for a journalist. And this is where, to Danielle's point, where we go for our information, it is no longer safe for a journalist in the United States, according to some sources. And that to me just really stood out, especially as we think about the amount of information that we rely on these folks and what they do and how they put themselves in sometimes in harm's way to provide information for the American people. I think that that's really, really important to point out. I also think that while it's different and how we all curate what news we want. We all decide what news we want to subscribe to, and we all do that according to what we think is our truth. And to Jillian's point, I think it's important to have a very diverse and unbiased way to get the news. We will be providing, Women for Change will be providing an issue-based voter guide before November. And it will have a way for folks to get directly in touch with candidates. We will have information on that guide. We will have buzzwords, stats, all these things. So to put that power back into your hands, whether you want to get your news from TikTok, as the New York Times and others are now calling the powerhouse. I just see my children doing dances, but that's where they're getting their news from. Or if you're still subscribing to the NPR like my father, I think that this is a way that we can all just go on to Women for Change, and you will have that issue-based voter guide. It will be nonpartisan. We're just talking about the issues right now. We're talking about what we've been following and what's important. And I also think, you mentioned 2016, but before 2018, men held majority of seats in every single state legislature, every single one. 80% of Congress, they accounted for all but 6 governors, and more than 3/4% of large city mayors were men. And this year, as we are talking about the commemoration, not celebration, because not all women were granted the right to vote 100 years ago. Some were, and I think that's really important to point out. Indiana, we've still never had a woman governor from Indiana. We've still never had a woman federal senator from Indiana. Our large city, Indianapolis, we need to have a woman of color leading us, because what we know is that when women lead, women like Representative Shackleford, I know that Senator Jean Rose on the line, they work together across party lines to get things done, because that's what we do. Women, we make a checklist and we cross that off and we keep on moving, because we remove ourselves and our egos and we put everybody else first. This is a fact.
I'm gonna put a pin. We've seen some really great questions in the chat. specifically around resources. So I'm going to step away for a quick second and just acknowledge that our participants are engaging in the chat. We will get to all of your questions. Hopefully I'll be able to synthesize them so that our panel can respond in a way that's meaningful and uses our time efficiently. So keep them coming. I see them and we will get them asked. So it's important for us to continue to have these conversations, but everything does seem to come back to long-term engagement, knowing where to get your information, having trusted sites and sources for the information. And so if we do all of this work, what are your hopes for the future of voting in Indiana? And I'll ask this question to Representative Shackleford first, because you're being an elected official here at the state level. What are your hopes?
So my hopes is that we make voting more convenient, more safe, timely, where people can vote anytime, anywhere. And I want to see that voter turnout just increase. I think the more convenient we make it for people, instead of them having to vote while they're at work or take their lunch break and try to get there by 6 o'clock, if we make it more convenient and then they understand the power of their vote, and we're slowly seeing them understand the power of their vote by them issuing these demands and their wants. But if we do all this, if we can make it just as easy as going shopping or going to the mall, I think we'll start to see more people actually engaged and more people voting.
Awesome, thank you. Jillian, you've got I was gonna say, you looked really pensive over there.
One thing I want to see in the future are more polling sites in our more populated areas. I just think it's a shame in 2020 with all our technology that we have people waiting in line for 3 hours. Like I saw lawn chairs and coolers. Like we should not have that in 2020. I'd like to see, I think Representative Shackleford brought this up, an independent commission drawing the districts so that we can have more transparency in this process and people can really start trusting in the system. I think more diversity in candidates. I think you'll see more people get out there when they start seeing themselves in their potential representatives.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for that. But what about the formerly disenfranchised voter? How do we bring them into the fold? And it sounds like we've got people that are working on bringing Gen Z in by figuring out ways to make it in their language, so to speak, right? So delivering it in their preferred media types. But what about the formerly disenfranchised or people who believe that they don't have the right to vote, whether they've been told so or not?
Well, we have to figure out a way to connect with them wherever they are. We can't just sit where we are. We have to go to where they are. And I think that's part of it. And part of it is voter education. I mean, it would involve changing the systems that we have in place, which is so difficult because we're trying to play in a game that we didn't write so often. So now we have to go back and say, okay, what can we do to change these rules? How can we actually go so that if you have somebody who is a convicted felon as part of their release, they actually understand that, yes, they can vote. And that is something that people need to be educated on about how they actually do so. And we need to have same-day voter registration. I mean, it's just, I cannot believe that we don't have that in Indiana. And we should have no-fault absentee balloting. I mean, there are so many things that we can do to reach out to people to let them know this is how you vote. And this is how we're going to make it as easy as possible. Danielle was talking about easing the friction. These are all part and parcel of it. Getting to people, making it easy, allowing them to mail in their ballot or drop off their ballots from their car if you have a drop-off spot. I cannot remember where that is. But actually making it easier so that people can do it in whatever way possible.
So we're all alluding to what it's really a space that I wanted us to spend a little bit more time in having a conversation. So many advocated for mail-in ballot, mail-in voting for the Indiana primary, and Marion County City Council went out of their way to make sure that they mailed out applications for the absentee ballot. and put marketing kind of pieces around it. Make sure that you knew you could return this. But what about the 1,800 ballots that weren't counted in Marion County? So what can we do to make sure that if we get the mail-in voting, that we can make sure that all of those ballots actually count in the general election? And I think that there are a lot of people who have likely joined us today, and that's the question that they had on their mind and on their heart that they were passionate about when they joined us. Based off of the chat, some opinions that we see in there and some concerns really are around timing in the mail. So what are our thoughts about that? How can we help ease the complication around mail, but also get people to trust the process?
I'll just chime in. I know one thing we can do is extend the time that you can actually drop off that ballot. Some people are just hesitant about putting their ballot in the mail. So this time they only had it to noon. People didn't understand they only had to noon election day, which didn't make any bit of sense whatsoever. If the polling site is open to 6, then we had numerous people coming up, getting mad, getting back in their car because it was communicated that they can just drop it off and they didn't have to wait and they can come to the front of the line. But what they didn't understand is that they had to be there by noon on election day to drop off their completed ballot. That definitely needs to change. That was just so idiotic. It just didn't even make any sense. It turned away so many people. So many people just left the polling site because they didn't want to wait in the 2 and 3 hour line that we had going on. So definitely extend that deadline. They should be able to drop it off until 6 o'clock because of the issues that we have with mail. And we have to get more vote centers, and we got to get them statewide. Only a couple of counties actually got vote centers. Lake County does not have vote centers. They're still voting at their designated places, which we have reduced. So you have a large amount of people that still has to go to a specific polling site, even during COVID, in order for their vote to be counted and wait in extremely long lines. So we have to definitely extend vote centers so people can vote at any location, anywhere in the city, across the state.
Mm-hmm. Does anyone else want to chime in there? Because I do think that one big, huge piece to that is we had the no fault kind of status that was added to allow us to vote by mail. There are states that vote 100% by mail, no questions asked. They just vote by mail. And they have higher participation and engagement. Here in Indiana, we have to deal as a state with the way that we do our elections. So what about trust? What about voting by mail? How can different organizations and individuals and groups, because I know we have representatives from several that are here tonight, advocate or educate their people on that process?
I was thinking about, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay, go ahead.
Well, we've been able to have this experience, identify some of the gaps and the issues, and the number of coalitions and groups on here, why not go and take those to our elected officials, our Secretary of State, have that conversation and say, here are the issues. How are you going to address them before our general election? Because I think time is of the essence now. And this is the time. I think in this climate, I think people are advocating for change, and I think people are finally being open to it.
It's a good point.
Adrianne, I mean, the short answer is we need to start planning right now. The same way that schools are trying to plan for scenarios A, B, C, D, and E, we need to come together as a state and get our arms around this. It's complicated, and we probably need to determine what are the plans, at least A, B, and C, and have those mapped out so that we're not inventing it on the fly in the moment so close to election day.
Mm-hmm.
If I can just add one more recommendation, I think I saw in the chat someone asked about county, like should there be a deadline so we can have time to count? Actually, the counting time needs to be extended before election day. I know there were issues where the counters had to go home at 8 o'clock and they actually wanted to stay to 10 o'clock and continue counting. So we need to extend that time period that we can actually count these ballots that are coming in that day before election. There were so many things in this process that needs to be tweaked and changed. Right now, the person to advocate to is the Secretary of State and the governor and our Marion County clerk. They're all trying to work on this, and they're working on November. So at the state level, make sure you reach out to the governor and the Secretary of State, because they're the ones that's going to be decide about the no-fault absentee voting, the voting centers, how it's going to be set up again for November.
You took my follow-up question and you answered it before I could even get it out of my mouth, is who exactly do we talk to about this? We've spent a considerable amount of time this evening talking about the advocacy, talking about the engagement, talking about what you do beyond just voting. There's an in-between time also between a primary and a general election. Specifically, if it was a bad primary where we had friction or we had things that didn't work. There's plenty of time right now to get engaged and to advocate the way that was just shared with the people who are in charge of making those decisions. And so if we show up in great number and we ask the right questions and we put the right pressure, those sorts of things can be addressed. So thank you so much for that. So is there anyone that I want to make sure? Yep. Okay. Before I move on.
I had to. I also wanted to add the Election Commission. Their meetings are public. They have public meetings. So if you want to advocate for mail-in, no fault, early voting sites, satellite, all of these things, attend one of their meetings, and they are now on Zoom. You can use the same chat function that we're doing today and send in your questions. Their information, the members of that commission, their information is online. Send them an email, let them know. They're the ones that are, going through those scenarios, as Danielle talked about, A, B, C, D, and E. Let them know which one works for you and your family and why. What we don't want is another Wisconsin. What we don't want is another Georgia and some of those counties. What we don't want is to standing in line. I hate the cold, and the cold with a pandemic in November, no thank you. I'm not very good in standing in lines, which is why I don't go to Disney. So if you are not happy with any of those, attend the Election Commission meeting and write to them, because they need to hear from you.
I think that that's super important, and thank you for sharing all of that. Nicole?
I was just going to say, also don't forget to reach out to your county clerk who actually runs the elections, because they have some input and they'll be on their local election board. So you may not be able to affect change at the state level, but you could also do it at the local level as well. So they may have some things that they can maneuver around within the state rules that will make a difference as well. And just for anybody who's confused, I am the city clerk. I am not the county clerk. The county clerk in this area is actually also Nicole. Her name is Nicole Brown. We call her the short Nicole because I'm the tall one. So, but it is something to keep in mind, because I know that Nicole works very hard to try and do what she can to make voting more accessible within her role. So it is something you should always be aware of. And the election board meetings down here are also local, so or electronic. That's what.
Thank you so much for sharing that information. And I think that's the other piece to it, right? So we can only encourage and engage people as to run, to be candidates, if we also understand that they're doing the best that they can, but sometimes they don't hear from people. Sometimes they don't have engagement that they're looking for. And the more concerns that they hear, the more likely they are to react. So encounter them and embrace them with grace, but also make sure that you're asking and advocating for the right things. So let's go back a little bit. Representative Shackleford said that you need people to be engaged through January. If we need to continue the same level of advocacy that has started this summer all the way through January, what would be some voting related policies that we should be advocating for in the 2021 session?
So I think some of those things that we've mentioned, more vote centers, to have vote centers statewide, more early voting sites, early locations. Trying to think what all I had on here for the voting. Making sure early voting, voter sites, access to voting centers, access to voting sites, making sure there's longer time to count, that we give the clerk's office more time to count the ballots, making sure there's no fault ballots that people can do. I think going forward, there's no need to just say we're going to do it at this election or one election based on a pandemic. It should just be statewide, no fault absentee ballots. And coming up with a longer count time, if we need a longer count time, if we are going to keep a deadline on it or discuss taking off that deadline, but at least letting those ballots be turned in into election day. So those are just some of the things that I think you can advocate in January at the State House.
Thank you. And Rima had we'll go to Jill and then we'll bounce around. Go for it.
And also be aware that there's interim study committees. So I know that the Legislative Council passes a resolution on what they're going to talk about, what their committees are going to study during the summer. I think COVID was one of them and how it impacts certain things. And it would be interesting to see, and I'll look here after this to see how we vote and how COVID has impacted that, if that's going to be studied. And if not, maybe even reaching out to someone sitting on that interim study committee, if this can be looked at, right? Because this study committee will look at things and have it prepared before January 1. But I think their actual reports are due in September. Representative Shackleford, you might know better than I.
We start study committees next month in July. Reports are due in October. I'm pretty sure COVID and the elections is probably being studied in elections. I know COVID and disparities is being studied in health. We're having all the state agencies come in and do reports on how COVID have affected like every part of the state agency. So whether it's DWD, FSSA, Family and Social Services, Health Department, Department of Children's Services. This year is going to be a little bit different because we are requiring all those state agencies to come in and give us an update on how they've been affected by COVID and what they've been doing to overcome. So yes, the study committees is a great way to engage and do it over the summer before we start drafting our bills. We draft our bills during the summer. They're due in December. So if there is a bill that you want, this is the perfect time to reach out to your legislature during this time while we're in study committee, summer studies, and while we're in the process of drafting legislation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Rima?
Yeah, one of the things that we've been advocating for is, of course, consent legislation, and the fact that in Indiana, no does not mean no. And that I'm really happy to share that is one of the pieces that's going to be studied and talked about and that bill's going to be looked into during this time. It's a big win for us. Through the Clothesline Project, we collected postcards from over 1,500 women and men throughout all 92 counties that were talking about their sexual assault. And the fact, again, that in Indiana, no does not mean no. We rank 7th highest in the nation as far as sexual assault among high school girls, and that we need to pass this legislation in 2020. So I would definitely urge all of you to be in touch with your legislators and to really follow what happens with this piece of legislation, because it is vital for our future generations that we pass this.
Thank you so much for that. Jill, were you trying to speak? Did you have something? Oh, okay. I try to look for body movement. Representative Shackleford, did you have something that you wanted to add?
No, I'm sorry. I was just muting it.
Okay. So we've been through a lot of our questions, but folks have started sending in some questions, and I would like to take a quick moment and get through some of those if you don't mind. So one of them, government relies upon participants that follow the law as well as ethical principles. How does one engage with when participants in government are no longer trustworthy, follow the laws or historical ethical standards? What's our mode of operation? What do we do here?
Repeat that question one more time.
So I think the spirit of the question is that government relies upon participants to follow the law as well as ethical principles. When a government or elected official is no longer trustworthy and is no longer following laws or ethical standards, what can we do?
Well, I think every industry has bad apples. I would not let our bad apples deter you from being engaged in the process. This is too vital of an industry. This is too vital of a process for you to sit out because we have a couple of elected officials that are bad actors. Now, of course, we should call out those bad actors. We should try to get them to come to justice or make sure they're arrested or whatever their activity is. But I don't want that to deter people. I want them to still have faith in the process and faith in this industry, that at the bottom line, we represent you and we represent what you believe in and what you stand for. And if one person doesn't do what they're supposed to do, you'll find another elected official doing what you want them to do.
Thank you for sharing that. Specifically coming from an elected official, it's very important. I'm not sure how many newer voters or non-regular voters that we have with us today. I can guarantee out of the 60 or so participants that we have, there's someone here who may be concerned about that. So is there anyone else that wants to respond to how we might even be able to inspire or engage someone who might be in that position to stay in the process or stay in the fight while we engage with those sorts of bad actors?
Well, we all get an option come November. If you're not happy with those that represent you, you have the option to vote for the person that does represent you. And I'll also want to add that there's not going to be anyone that aligns with you 100%. The only person that aligns with you 100% is you. We talked about the fact that we need more representation. We talked about the fact that we need more women in office. I would urge all of you to run for office. Obviously, don't run against Representative Shackleford because she's our friend, but and Nicole. But nobody is going to align with you 100%. Your spouse doesn't. Your kids don't. Your siblings don't. If you are unhappy with who represents you, please vote for someone that does more accurately represent you. And if you don't find that person, please run.
Thank you so much for that. So another question that we received through the chat is, what are strategies proposed, and this is likely for Rima or for Danielle, what are strategies that can be proposed for reaching, informing women that are not registered? So what do we do for them, the women who aren't registered? They said they like the idea of talking to your neighbors, but you also run the risk of having differing views.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Adrianne. We've been studying behaviors of different generations as part of our learning this effort and the world that we're in as far as One More Voice goes. And what we've discovered is that across every generation, the most influential way to move people, men and women, is through issues that they care about, issues that are close to them, issues that they believe one voice can actually make an impact on. And while much great attention is around the national elections, the reality is your voice does matter and does count at the local level. It's really easy to see that when you have smaller numbers. So I would say one big way to do that is through issues. Secondly, our research shows that younger generations, Gen Z, millennials, came up through different dynamics. Gen Xers, boomers, and those who came before us were told to keep politics quiet, keep it inside, don't share it, don't talk about it, don't put yourself out there. That is not the shared opinion of younger generations. So one thought is to follow the example of our Gen Zers and millennials and be willing to step out on issues that we care about, be willing to share information about registering to vote, be willing to share on election day that were a proud voter. Some of those behaviors are not innate in all of us. And so I think we can learn from younger generations who live with much more transparency, openness, and a willingness to share. It's hard. Those are not easy things to do. But I would say evaluate how you are choosing to show up in this environment. Can you influence a young person in your family to register to vote? Do you have a young neighbor who would register to vote? I've mentioned I have 2 teenage daughters. We have college students who help get them to activities after school because I'm a working parent and so is my husband. Every time they came to our house, as we were getting to know One More Voice, I would say to them, I'd ask them questions. Are you registered to vote? Can I help make it easy for you? Will you go on your phone right now? And it was so simple and a moment of great pleasure for them to get active because someone who cared about them had enough care to help them take the next step toward voting. So I'd say put yourself out there, get a little uncomfortable, and engage in the conversation.
Thank you. And Rima, or I see Representative Shackleford has her hand raised. Do you have it raised? But there's an add-on to the question. How do we locate women that aren't voting?
So what the research that I've seen shows that women from lower socioeconomic class, new Americans, returning citizens, so those that were previously in the criminal justice system, and women of color, and especially younger women of color, that those women are not always turning out to vote. And I wanted to add the fact that it has taken decades to form this system of, voter disenfranchisement. So it's going to take that, and it's taken a lot of work to push people out, and it's going to take double that amount of work to bring them back in. And that's important. Don't put that ownership on those folks. Don't say, well, you guys aren't voting. No. You set up a system to make sure those people were not voting. So turn that conversation around. And it's very much like victim blaming. That's what I think of it as. It's very much victim blaming. And I think it's going to take, again, going back in, forming very real and genuine relationships and telling people that their vote matters, their voice matters, their engagement matters because of who they are, not because that they're going to help add a percentage on to help get someone elected. And that's really, really important. Go out into neighborhoods and engage with people and tell people that they matter, not just November, like I said, but throughout the year, because people will, like they did to me, they will call you out on that.
So we're back to playing the long game.
I will add one more way to get that data. If you contact the parties, the Republican parties and the Democrat parties, they have that data, so they can pull the women when they last voted, if they haven't voted, and get that information, and then you can partner with them to see if you want to do some type of outreach or an engagement. One tool I just learned about last week is called blackchurch75.com. They are reaching out to the churches because they want 75% of their congregation registered and voting. It is from NAN. So what a church does is upload their membership information, and then NAN will send them back a report of who has voted, who's registered, who's not, and then if they voted in the last general election. And then they help them work that list. So I think there's different tools out there and organizations out there that we can look into that are help identifying those, whether if they're women, minorities, and then working with them and get them registered to vote and get them voting.
Absolutely. And that was an extremely important thing to note. There are people who are monitoring our voting history, people who are monitoring our participation. Those organizations and resources can be used for good also when it comes down to engaging people. And that's what it takes to get everyone out to vote. It takes everyone helping everyone and inspiring and engaging each other. And so at this time, we thank the folks who've already sent in questions. This panel has already been amazing, but we've got about 15 more minutes that we can still take more questions. So if you've had a question that you've been considering, if there's something that I missed from the chat, please raise your hand using the little hand that you have in your little panelist screen, and we will call on you, or you can place your question in the chat. The first question that we have is, how can we get stores and other businesses to help register voters? I was a volunteer in 2016, and Aldi, Meijer, and Goodwill would not allow us on the premises. Rima?
Not sure about stores, but we will be talking about, I know that Danielle will talk about One More Voices, Get Out the Vote campaign and plan at the end of this Zoom meeting, and I will also be talking about Women for Change and what we have in store, and we are really looking for volunteers to help us mobilize. So I would just say, again, I can't speak to stores, maybe Nicole or Jillean or Representative Shackleford will have some ideas on that, but if you want to learn about organizations, just stick around after the call, and we'll be talking about that.
So I would say continue to reach out to those stores that are allowing people to do voter registration. I know there's some that will let in, like the League of Women Voters, organizations that they're used to, that they know is going to be bipartisan. But I think with retail and any private company, they just want to make sure that you're going to be nonpartisan, that it's open to everybody. They need to be familiar with your organization. But if you can partner with one of those bigger organizations and get them to get the partnership, then that'll probably be easier.
That's a great point.
I'm thinking
And
about, oh, go ahead.
Whoop. Do you want to go ahead, Jillean, or do you want me to go?
Go ahead, Nicole,
Okay.
I'll after.
I was going to say also, rather than going just through businesses, reaching out through other organizations that are doing community events and that sort of thing, and saying, hey, we see that you're setting up this event. Recently, we did a Juneteenth celebration in Bloomington, and well, actually we did two, but Black Lives Matter actually set up a voter registration table at the event as well. So they made sure that they had voter registration going on. And I think if people just start looking at community events and say, hey, we want to set up a table and start doing voter registration, there are some, you know, whoever's doing voter registration has to be cautious about making sure that they get all the information and they turn in those applications in a timely manner. And I think sometimes people get afraid of that as well, but it doesn't mean that you can't do it. You just have to work around some of those businesses who are afraid of it. So that was all.
I would encourage you to use resources that are available, like onemorevoice.com. Also, nearly every American has one of these. And if you're uncertain about way to set it up through paper forms or in a complicated fashion, any person can get onto the website through their mobile phone and register within minutes with their driver's license handy.
Thank you. So I think that it's important, and thank you for Patricia for putting that in the chat. There are so many coalitions that can be built in every community, specifically around voter engagement. And if we all work together, we can make much lighter work of all the work that we have ahead of us. So thank you. Is there anyone else that has a question? If you would like, you can raise your hand, or if you're bold, you can take yourself off mute and you can ask the panel yourself.
I just wanted to add one more thing to what Danielle said, just in case anybody asks about voter registration. You don't just have to have a driver's license. And so many times people hear, oh, I have to have a driver's license, and they think, oh, I can't vote. You just have to have a state issued picture ID.
Thank you, Nicole.
Yeah, and we bumped into that sometimes when we're registering people, and they're like, oh, I can't vote then. And just reminding people they can get the ID. It's not like the greatest thing, but you can get it, and then you can register to vote with it too. And you can still use your phone, and that is by far the easiest and fastest method I've seen for registering people. So.
Yeah, but we also have that as an echo in the chat as well, that the most efficient and effective way to register is online. So if you're setting up a table, to make sure that you have a laptop, a tablet, or something like that. I know I'm guilty of this, and years past, you go out with your pen, your paper, you try to get as many people as you can, but there's still a next step after the pen and paper collection. So if you're set up to do it online, it's much easier to do that. We also have a note in the chat that if you're using a federal registration form, you can also use the last 4 digits of your social security number. So that's very important for people to know. Do we have any other questions? Oh, I'm sorry, Jillean.
I did want to add something. I think for many, voting can be overwhelming because you feel like you might have to have a great deal of knowledge on a plethora of issues. The truth is, find something you're passionate about. So if it's education, like I would engage candidates, or you can engage candidates on a topic or an issue that you are very passionate about, as opposed to having to understand and have knowledge or questions about a great deal of things. So I would encourage people to, you know, talk to their neighbors. Something that really kind of gets them moving might actually get the motivation out there to go and vote, and encourage others to get out there and vote.
I wanted to share too that next month in July, One More Voice will have more these resources I've been referring to online, and as part of that, one of the resources being developed is a virtual ballot, so you can see who literally is on your ballot, the issues, the people, the referendums you're voting for in your local area. You'll be able to find that online. That has not always been the case. I think we can all appreciate that past experience meant having to go online, reading a couple of different resources to make sure you know all of the issues and candidates that you'll be voting for, and sometimes deciding which of those you feel like you have enough information about when you go in on election day. One More Voice is centralizing that so that you, no matter where you live, corner to corner of the state, you can find your local information in a really handy way.
I mean, I think that we are really doing a great job at connecting the dots to what the long game actually looks like. The long game doesn't look like just getting someone engaged around an issue. It doesn't look like just getting them registered to vote. It doesn't look like just getting them to one election. It also looks like getting them connected to the people that represent them, getting them connected to all the issues, and engaging them to the point where they participate every single election, in season and off season. This is all awesome. So also, thank you for the folks who are chiming in the chat, adding and helping us to fill in this conversation and making it even more rich. Is there any other question that we have? Seeing none, I'd like to go ahead and just thank this panel for being amazing. Thank you for fully participating. Thank you for bringing yourselves, your full answers, and your interests for this wonderful group to hear from you. Rima, turning it over to you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you again. Danielle, I will turn it over to you. I know that you wanted to talk about One More Voice. I will then end out and kind of talk about Women for Change and what we're going to be doing. Thank you to our fellow panelists. It was just amazing to be on a panel with you. I know Jillean, I'd love to meet you in person when we can, but thank you all again. And Danielle, over to you, and I will then close it out.
Thank you. It was a great pleasure, and I realize what an opportunity it is to have this engaged audience to share this information with. I promise it will be just a few minutes and reinforcing some of what we've talked about already this evening. But I wanted to make sure you were able to connect to One More Voice. If you would be so kind, please join us in the conversation. Grab your phone right now, or if you're on your computer, and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And of course, if you go to onemorevoice.com, if you're not already a voter, you can register there, but also you can sign up to receive those email and text reminders that I mentioned at the beginning of our time together. All right. Let's see if my computer will cooperate with me. Hang tight, it's freezing up. I may just do it this way. Let's see here. Okay, great. So this is a sense for what you'll see when you get to our website and when you follow us on social media. I want to mention, you'll start to see in our campaign, One More Voice, that there is an opportunity for you to get engaged as an individual. So it might be one more woman's voice, one more Northern Indiana voice, one more fill in the blank to what you want to represent or stand for. On this call and on this meeting today, I believe are the founders of One More Voice and who founded Indiana Citizen, Ann Burrow and Bill Moreau, who I think are on with us today. Indiana Citizen is behind One More Voice, another nonpartisan organization, a 501c3 that has put its mission around increasing the number of informed, engaged voters that we've talked about this evening. So what are some ways that you can get involved? If you're not already registered, please go to onemorevoice.com and do that today. If you can encourage one friend, one family member, one person in your church, one person on your street to register to vote, you will have done a great service for our community, our state. Stay connected through those email and text reminders I mentioned. You can also sign up to volunteer, and the lift is as light or heavy as you choose to participate in. So whether you want to be a connector and share one more voice information with people who are inside of your contact list, inside of your phone contacts, if you will, that's a simple way to do it. Or you can sign up to volunteer and be more actively engaged with the work we're doing. Of course, engage in the conversation on social media with us, and we hope that you'll show up to vote this November. Thanks so much, Rima.
Thank you. Wanted to share that, you know, Adrianne mentioned that we, Women for Change, we started right after the 2016 election when our co-founders got together and they felt like there was a loss of civility in public discourse. And that still stands true today. And we're really looking to engage, inform, and make sure that Hoosier women and men get out the vote. We are looking to engage between 200 and 400,000 women and men, and we need your help. We need your help. We need volunteers. We need folks to get out there. As I shared before, we will be having a comprehensive issue-based voter guide. So these are the policies that Women for Change advocates for during the General Assembly and obviously outside of the Assembly. You will have a way to directly contact your candidate through the voter guide as well, which is really nice. But we are looking for your help through the Interim Study Committee as we talk about consent legislation. We need your help for November to make sure that Hoosier women and men are out voting. We're looking for volunteers. Please email Haley at womenforchangeindiana.org if you would like to volunteer with the organization. And as always, we are looking for your support. If you would consider making a donation, no amount is too small or too large. You can go to our website and make a donation there. You can also donate a check to our office. We are located at 1100 West 42nd Street, Suite 212, Indianapolis. Our zip code is 46208. You can also find this information on our website. But your long-term engagement through November and obviously through the General Assembly is what really we're looking for as well. So I do sincerely hope that you will consider volunteering with the organization. We know women, what we're looking for are the 3 T's: your time, your talent, and of course your treasures. So if you consider doing that, because we have a heavy lift ahead of us and it's going to take a community of women to really make that difference and make that change that we so badly need here in our state that we all love. So thank you again. If you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to reach out to us, and we look forward to seeing you at the next program. A big thank you again to our moderator, Adrianne Slash. She's a Women for Change advisor, a founding board member. A big thank you to our panelists, a big thank you to our Women for Change change makers. These programs would not be possible without you, and a big thank you to our board. I hope you all stay safe, stay well, and good evening.